Terry, actually, I'll start with you, because even though the story today is India and the US, you have been long arguing that at some point these stories are going to converge. What do you make of not just what's happened, but what impact that might have on what the Canadians under Trudeau are doing and saying? Because there's a sense or a growing cynicism in India that the Americans are basically firing from the shoulder of the Trudeau government and acting in tandem.
I think what's happening is that the Indians and the Americans are working their way towards a nice little deal, whereby much of this, not all of it, but some of it is going to be swept under the rug, and that India can tell its people, the Indian government can tell Indians that we've achieved a diplomatic triumph here, because there's really no prospect of having a public embarrassing trial of Mr. Yadav, and the Americans are going to let us off the hook. At least that's how they'll sell the resulting deal. The Canadians, though, are more or less left out of this, except for the lingering problem that has always existed on the Indian side. The Indians have been very vociferous in denouncing the Canadian allegations, as you know, as absurd and preposterous and so forth, while at the same time offering no dispute at all of the American allegations, which are the same. The Americans have alleged that this former Indian government official was involved in plotting murder on Canadian soil of a Khalistani activist. And the FBI has alleged that Yadav was the principal in this plot. And India has been saying that Canada's allegations that an Indian government official was involved in a murder plot are exactly the same as the American allegations that a government official was involved in a murder plot. And all along, the Indian government has been telling, oh, no, these are completely different. The two cases are unrelated. Well, read the FBI indictment, please, in which Nikhil Gupta, who is indicted as the handler of this alleged plot, who hired the alleged hitman, he says, he tells the hitman, we're out to kill Gurpatwant Pannun, as you rightly reported. And there is also another target in Canada, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. In other words, the same allegations have been made by the US and Canada, and India, as far as I can tell, is still offering no dispute in the American case, different geopolitical relationship, right? I think
but that could be reversed, because the Indians might argue, have offered no hard evidence, whereas the Americans have.
Indeed, but does that evidence not work somehow in the Canadian matter? I mean, it's not as though it doesn't apply. That you have the suspect on tape saying that Nijjar is also a target of this same plot, and Nijjar ends up dead. What is that, a coincidence? I mean, it seems to me quite clear that the Americans and the Canadians are on the same trail, looking perhaps from different angles, making the same allegation, and that India's protestations that these are completely different cases simply will not wash. It's simply nonsensical. If you read the indictment, you see it's the same plot. Anyway.
Okay. Let me
don't know enough about the deal, but that's the broad outline.
I don't know. Ambassador Dayal might be better able to comment on whether he thinks that this is moving towards a deal. Ambassador Dayal, because at the moment, what ordinary Indians who are not diplomats, who are not deeply into this issue, are seeing is the FBI release a poster where one of India's own agents, let's remember that as far as we know, we only got to know 2 days ago that this man called Vikash Yadav has been terminated and has been detained. But if we can bring up that FBI poster, please, and actually juxtapose it with the NIA's own poster, which shows Gurpatwant Pannun as one of our most wanted. When you look at that poster, what I see as an Indian is there was somebody in government service. Either we're saying he went rogue, or we think he did something wrong, which is why we've detained him and dismissed him. I don't think we see a deal. I think we see either an acknowledgement that Vikash Yadav was up to no good, or that he's gone rogue, or both. what do you see? Do you see that the Indians and Americans have cooperated enough to reach some sort of arrangement, as Terry hints?
Well, the Americans have themselves said that they have received full cooperation from India. And unlike what my friend from Canada says, there are sharp differences between what happened in our relations with Canada and what happened with the United States. The United States shared evidence with us, and there were teams which were exchanged, visits were exchanged, and therefore it was possible to examine what these allegations were because they were substantiated with some evidence. On the other hand, the Canadian Prime Minister kept saying that he had given India proof after he had made those allegations. He repeated his statements on a number of occasions. In fact, other senior personages from the Canadian side also did so, that they had given evidence, they had given proof. Now, a couple of days ago, while deposing before that inquiry commission, federal inquiry, the Canadian Prime Minister says that what he had shared with India were intelligence inputs and had not given concrete proof. Now, intelligence inputs do not constitute proof. They are hearsay. They are what agencies have learned, and this information is shared. So, what has gone on with the United States is completely different as compared to what has happened in the case of Canada. Besides, I think Mr. Justin Trudeau comes out as a liar because he has repeatedly said to us that he has given us proofs, and this is what he has said to the world. But when he was testifying before the inquiry commission, he couldn't tell a lie there, because if his lie had been found out, the consequences for him would have been disastrous.
So you don't see the dots. You don't see the dots. You don't see the dots converging. You don't see these two cases converging at some point.
Well, Khalistani separatist activities in many Western countries have been on the rise, and that is where the dots converge. The Khalistanis have targeted Indian diplomatic missions and consulates in Australia, in Canada, and the United States. So there is a sense of convergence, and the fact of the matter is all these countries take the plea that they respect freedom of speech, that in their countries freedom of speech is cannot be challenged and they have to allow it. But these are people who are targeting the Indian nation, calling for the murder of Indian diplomats. How can it be construed as freedom of speech? This is an outright misuse of freedom of speech. Unfortunately, all these countries don't seem to get the message, and I think it is essential for the Indian government to convey to all these countries that holding separatist Khalistan elements and allowing them to damage the relations with India will be very, very harmful for them too. India will have to build a constructive and sustained engagement with the Sikh diaspora, and at the same time it will have to take action vis-a-vis these extremists through the government's concern, and these governments have to become more receptive to our concerns.
Okay, but let's also remember that just before the Prime Minister was in the United States of America, the White House invited known Khalistani separatists. I find the Americans seem to speak in forked tongues on this issue. Let's play out the last on-record response of the White House. This after it became known that the ex-RAW official charged with being involved in this plot had indeed been dismissed from service. Take a look.
They did inform us that the individual who was named in the Justice Department indictment is no longer an employee of the Indian government.
Are you satisfied with the cooperation with the Indian government?
We are satisfied with the cooperation. It continues to be an ongoing process. We continue to work with them on that, but we do appreciate the cooperation, and we appreciate them updating us on their investigation as we update them on ours.
And do you see further meetings with them?
I don't have anything to announce.
Okay, so, Hasnani, if I can bring you here, you have been actually flagging, in a way, the different approaches, and Terry talks about that, how does India have one approach to Canada, another to the United States. Pannun was the lawyer for Nijjar. The indictment links both cases. The Indians are taking the indictment seriously. The Indian investigation team is at this moment in the United States of America. But you heard Ambassador Dayal, you can't compare the two. How do you respond?
Well, I think we are making a difference between the way, the manner in which the two governments have approached us. I think at some point that is going to go away. Mr. Trudeau may not last next year's election. We've already heard from Pierre Poilievre to say that if the RCMP takes these allegations this seriously, they are serious. So I don't think that getting into the form of how we have been approached with evidence and allegations is going to really matter, because in a little while there'll be another government in the US as well. What happens if that government becomes more aggressive than the present one? I mean, I'm just making the point that I don't think we need to get into what Mr. Trudeau says, because it's clear that a lot of his sentiments are fairly half-formed, without meaning to be very rude, because he says one thing and then we don't quite understand what these phrases mean. It's almost as if there's a preponderance of doubt in things that he's himself saying. I think he was misquoted on what he said in that commission, because I think what he was saying was that there was primary evidence that we took, or primary intelligence that we took to the Indian side and said, it is for you to investigate. And the Indian side said they wouldn't cooperate, which has been read to mean that the Canadians didn't have any evidence to begin with. I have no doubt in what you're saying, that the US and Canada are actually, in step with each other. The fact is that even today, we don't have an answer to a basic fact, which is that when the Canadians raised their allegations to begin with, which we know was in July, a month after, that's when the Canadian NSA spoke to our NSA. If we know that the Canadians raised that in their parliament, they raised it when Prime Minister Trudeau came to India before that. Essentially, why did the US not spare our blushes? Why did the US not tell us at that point that in November they were going to unseal an indictment that more or less corroborates everything that that the Canadians were alleging, i.e., that there seems to be some kind of a plot? It's a question of who believes what is enough evidence to establish wrongdoing. I mean, so far the US has also said we have transcripts, we have photographs, we have videos. Now they've put out this photograph of Vikash Yadav. This has not happened before this. What I'm saying is that I don't think the US is out of the loop as far as the Canadian case is concerned. It is quite likely, given the dates and the timeline that we have seen, that it is the US that provided that information to Canada, given what we know is in the transcript. What is in the transcript is that this man, Vikash Yadav, spoke to Nikhil Gupta, and essentially Nikhil Gupta spoke to a DA informant who also hired a hitman who was an undercover FBI operative. So the moment you've got an undercover FBI operative in the plot, you know that the US is already in a kind of game of entrapment. The idea that somehow there's this deal happening between India and the US and we only have to worry about Canada, I think this is perhaps hyped optimism on the Indian part. So the first thing I would like to say is really that this is not going away. 1 year later, we're still hearing the bits and pieces of this case that keep coming out. And please look at the fact that not only are there bits and pieces that are coming out in evidence and unsealed indictments, but look at the way they have leaked to various international agencies and international newspapers. The leak about Mr. Yadav's name came out in May in an American newspaper. That means that American officials are essentially leaking stories, putting out stories about what is to follow. If the RCMP today is talking about Lawrence Bishnoi and is talking, it has already appeared in other papers. Now we have some papers saying that the Indian Home Minister has been named as well. I don't know what to believe in terms of the shadow war that's being played out. I think there is a psychological a pressure war being played as well. But I think from the Indian point of view, we have to take this much more seriously and stop behaving as if what Mr. Trudeau says can be laughed out of the park. Therefore, all these allegations are unsubstantiated and unserious. The allegations are serious. There are indictments that go with them. I think there's a difference also between the Canadian legal system and the American legal system, in which case, in the American system, the indictment actually comes out for us to read. In the Canadian system, you're not allowed to do that until you go to trial. And Terry can correct me if I'm wrong on that. The last thing I have to say is that this is also about Indian credibility. We are not going to just be able to say we don't do this if on the one hand our politicians are saying, yes, we do go and ghar mein ghus ke maro when it comes to Pakistan. You can't say, yes, I do it when it comes to Pakistan. No, the Canadians are talking rubbish. Yes, with the US, I'm willing to set up a high-level panel and send that panel to the US, led by the Deputy NSA of India. With the Qataris, we're willing to cut a deal when they make those allegations against us. In the UAE case that has gone to the UK, we have a different kind of approach. So my point is that we need to now sit up and take this seriously. And I know, Barkha, you've been doing these shows for a year now. The fact is that it is not possible any longer for us to just continuously say there's no truth to any of the allegations, because it is about Indian credibility. And sometimes it's not enough to just say it stands for itself.
I agree with you very much on the fact that with respect, Ambassador Dayal, I feel very cynical about responses from the United States of America, much more so than Canada, because I think Trudeau is a bit of a caricature. It's the Americans who seem to be playing a kind of deep game here that is tougher to read. But General Bhatia, I take Suhasini's point that, this is about credibility. You've got to either own it or deny it and wish it away. But I think for a lot of Indians, it's also about staggering Western hypocrisy. On the one hand, people like Gurpatwant Singh Pannun are being protected in the name of free speech. On the other hand, I am old enough to remember an American journalist who was actually imprisoned because she did a story that revealed the name of a US agent, right? It was the Scooter Libby case. So the point that I'm trying to make is that for a lot of people, this is Western hypocrisy. When the Americans take out somebody in another country, it's to be lauded. When the Israelis do it, it's brilliant Netanyahu statecraft. When the Indians may or may not have done it, I have no idea. It is cast in a morality play. This, I don't know. I'm confused here about why we should accept this casting of this as a moral question. I don't think this is a moral question. Countries around the world have done this. I think this is a question of how these relationships are managed, how things are managed behind in the back channel. And I think what Terry is saying is that the Americans and Indians are managing something in the back channel that the Indians and Canadians are not being able to. What do you think?
Thank you, Baka. I think let me first start by saying that India today is a risen, responsible power. It is a resurgent power, resurgent nation. And we are a global leader and regional power. We do not endorse, we don't have a policy of eliminating people in other countries. Okay. Having said that, now let's get into the facts, what you talked about. As a matter of principle, anything that threatens our national interests, we have a right to protect and project our national interests. And sovereignty and territorial integrity is our core national interest. When the US does that, and you just flash the photograph of General Soleimani, of the Iranians, who was taken out by the Americans, or the Americans the US went into Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, world over, Israel is doing it. That's okay. That's fine. That's hypocrisy, right? They are entitled to do that. It's their right to protect the national interest. But when India does that, it is incorrect. It is wrong. It's principally incorrect. I think, let me shoot straight as a soldier. There is hypocrisy and total hypocrisy in this. And Canada, what's doing? They're not Khalistani terrorists. What is Khalistan? There's nothing about Khalistan. The people of Punjab are the most patriotic people. They're a very proud people. He's a Canadian terrorist who's talking about it. He's in Canada. He's a Canadian citizen. Where does Khalistan come into being? I really don't understand this, right? And if they're talking of, there are different relations between India, US, India, Canada. What is Canada trying to tell us? What is it trying to teach us? It is fermenting trouble for India, and we know it. We all know it. We have to understand that. And it's not, we should not accept it. We have to tell the Canadians that this, you can't cross our red lines. We are no longer the nation which the West thinks that we are. Today, we are a global leader. We are a power in ourselves, and we have the right to protect and project our national interests. Okay, so to that, I have no doubts about it. And the US, they can continue to do what they are doing. The Israelis continue to do what they are doing. I've been saying for long years that people like Hafiz Sayyid, Masood Azhar, Sayyid Salahuddin are fair targets. What is wrong with it? They're fair targets. And we should not, we should not preach.
But then maybe we should own that. Yes. Maybe the point is, maybe the point Suhasini is making is that you either own it or you take cover behind plausible deniability. That's how these operations have been over the years. And you're right to say the West has led most of them. Israel is leading multiple numbers of them at this point. Are we kind of caught between two stools here? Is that the awkwardness?